2022 y hoy vamos a estar hablando de modernización de aplicaciones o application modernization y Erin y Sherwood nos van a estar apoyando con la primera sesión del día de hoy hablando de observabilidad. Erin y Sherwood son directamente de Oracle y ellos nos van a presentar durante la siguiente hora. La presentación va a ser en inglés y ahora mismo voy a introducirlos a ellos o presentarlos y después le pasaré la voz a Erin. Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Sherwood, for being with us. We really appreciate your support and your help. And I already introduced you and talked with the audience about that this is going to be delivered in English and that you both, Erin and Sherwood, are from Oracle and that you're going to share with us in the next 45 to 50 minutes the observability presentation. All right, so thank you again, Erin, and you may start.
Hi, buenos días. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Hi, buenos días. Me llamo Erin, but I'm going to be speaking in English for this presentation. Pero si tienen preguntas o cualquier duda, está bien si puedes ponerlo en el chat. Rolando te va a ayudar. Bueno, voy a hablar en inglés, pero si lo necesitas, estoy aquí, puedo traducir un poquito. Ha sido como 10 años desde que hablé español, así que mi gramática está mal, pero puedo entender casi todo. Bueno, moving right along. I am going to share my screen. And Rolando, you will have to tell me if I'm sharing the right one.
Yes, it is okay. It is loading, but it is maybe 30 seconds. Okay, there you go. Your screen is there, and we can see your slide, and your slides are good.
Perfect. Then that means the hardest part of this presentation is over. Welcome, everyone. I don't look like Sherwood because I am not Sherwood, but Sherwood will be joining us very soon. This presentation is called Observability Solving IT Murder Mysteries Before They Happen to You. Very dramatic. But this is something that Sherwood and I think about quite a bit as we work with customers. And so I'm a senior principal product manager at Oracle. I specifically work on a team called strategic engagements, which means that we focus only on the things that our customers report the most. Most recently, customers have been talking most about how they can move their monitoring strategies into true, deep observability strategies that cross every aspect of their production applications. Today, I am joined by Sherwood Zern. Are you on the line at the moment? All right. Well, Sherwood was having a bit of mic issues. And so Sherwood's been around the block. He actually has been at Oracle for almost 15 years now, and I believe in IT for 37 years. And so, as they say in English, he knows where all the bodies are buried when it comes to the IT issues. And so today, we're going to walk you through a presentation about how you can go deeper with your observability and monitoring. So very specifically, we're going to start with just giving you an overview of what observability is. A lot of times, even I'm guilty of this, I refer to it the same as monitoring, and they're very much not the same. We're then going to walk through an IT murder mystery scenario so that we can crack the case. From there, Sherwood is going to share a demo of an open source observability solution that we build powered by OCI, which in this context means Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And then we're going to quickly wrap it up for you and share some closing remarks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, very simple. Let me know if you have any questions. And Rolando, if like my audio goes out, just let me know. But essentially, one of the things that we have very much seen since the sort of advent, they say, of COVID-19 is that customers and, of course, companies across the board are increasingly taking their offerings digital. And it is not a linear growth. You can see from this slide that it's really dramatic, right? So when you talk about different regions in the world, everyone is moving.
You need to switch your slide.
Pardon?
Your slide. You're still on the very first slide.
I'm not, but that's funny. Okay. Is that better?
Go back one.
Okay.
We can see the agenda, and now we can see the speakers.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess it just doesn't advance the slides when I'm in presenter mode. That's so odd. Okay, so the slide we should be on is this one. Probably makes a lot more sense, right?
Thanks, Erin.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. This telco product is not playing well with the Oracle security protocols, so I apologize for that. But essentially, what we found is that actually when we talk to our customers, the interactions are increasingly digital, around 80%. For the highly technical customers among us, it's actually moved to about 95%. And so very rarely is there a human on the line when you call somebody. And so what that means is that you have to get a lot better at when something goes wrong, finding and fixing it faster. And so the funny thing is that McKinsey didn't actually do this study for Latin America, but I would assume that based on our experiences with Latin American customers, which we work with pretty closely at Oracle, it would be an even higher number, probably similar to North America, because we're finding that our customers are going to the cloud and going digital in almost every scenario, which is a trend we've never really seen before. And actually something we're excited about. But the reality is that when things break, it can be more disruptive than ever before. And so what we want to do is use observability to demystify your IT systems so that when something goes wrong, and it inevitably will, you can find it and you can fix it. So let's see. One of the things that Sherwood and I have found when talking to customers is that we're guilty of this, use the word for monitoring and observability interchangeably, and that's not the case. Sherwood, would you like to walk them through this?
Sure. Sorry about that. So, as Erin had alluded to earlier, that monitoring is not necessarily observability. Monitoring feeds into your observability, and along those lines, so if you look at your general information of the overall system, what that means is that's the monitoring aspect. You're just looking at the overall system. Whereas observability allows you to dig deeper into the individual aspects of that organization. And then you go, the collecting of the raw data and producing reports is really about the monitoring aspects. However, if you're doing observability correctly, what this information then should be able to provide you is deep contextual insight into actually what's happening inside your system. Not at the 50,000 foot level, but at a much lower level. And then if you look at also where we usually see monitoring is we're looking at the application itself. And, we're looking at it from a very product specific level. We're just looking at the application from that level. Whereas observability, we seek to provide universal insights and an incredible deep level of granularity, exactly what this monitoring data is telling us and what type of actions we can take. So next slide, Erin. Okay, so regarding this slide, if you look at it from from the application code all the way through observability, what you're looking at is that mindset is, what is our attitude towards observability and how do we work from, going backwards? What is that information we need to actually make our system observable? So we start from that point and we then look at it as, well, what metrics, what event or events do I really need to capture to drive me to an actual good set of, the monitoring, and then how do I turn all of that information into observability, and then how do I come away with a very, if you will, bad English there, a strong observable system, But now you're not going to get this, just like in your application, you're not going to get this all right at the very beginning. You know that when you build your applications, it's iterative, incremental process. The same thing applies into taking all that monitoring that you want, and then eventually you may have that in the beginning, But then over time, you're going to expand upon that on monitoring, and then you're going to expand that and turn that into observability. It's all an iterative and incremental process. Erin?
Yes, and then maybe one thing I would add here is that when you think about building out your observability platform, start with your application code, right? And then think about the things that are most important in your system and start thinking about the journey that you'll take. And that's where the best events and metrics come through. And then you'll go up into monitoring. And then from there, and this is what's interesting, you start at the bottom with application code, super granular. Then you go into events and metrics that you build on top. And then you go into monitoring, and it's almost like a curve where observability goes right back down to that deep level, right? And so maybe it is sort of a line when you think about it as a diagram of which direction you need to go. Because a lot of times you'll learn things from monitoring that need to be instrumented all the way back in the code and all the way up. But keep in mind that like monitoring is high level and observability is deeply, deeply granular. So monitoring is not equal to observability. Moving right along. Here's a case for you. So an application dies in the middle of the night. This is something that we're all probably pretty familiar with, depending on how long you've been in IT. And you have to fix it, right? And so essentially, a lot of times you take this framework that we showed you and you think about the different questions that you typically ask. Ideally, you have a lot of this crystallized into playbooks that your on-call engineers can look at and run over and over again. If not, we all have pretty good pattern recognition from being in the industry. But essentially, there's sort of a good news and bad news situation here where in IT, if something dies, a lot of times it's recoverable and eventually it comes back better and more robust than it ever was before. So that's the good news. But the bad news is, and this is why observability is so important, is that IT issues happen a lot of times all at once and all over the place. So it's hard to figure out where it started. And so that's sort of why observability exists. So you can follow this issue all the way back to its root cause. Anything you want to add here, Sherwood?
No, I think it'd be good. We'll go through and we'll talk about some of the interesting parts about all this. So let's move forward.
Yeah. Yes, you're about to see it in action, actually, in just a minute. So essentially, I don't know if anyone's ever played the game Clue. It's very popular here in the States for children. But essentially, a murder happens. And there's these usual suspects, right? And you have to find out who did it, with what weapon, and in what room of the house. And essentially, when you think of sort of IT, the pain gets moved to sort of a lot of different houses, right? So when there's a network engineer who gets a ping from a canary that latency seems to be high, she maybe wakes up from her couch and checks on it and finds that nothing's wrong and just sort of suppresses the alarm and makes a note to check it tomorrow, right? And then on a completely different team, there's an on-call engineer making dinner, right? And then all of a sudden a bunch of canaries are firing and there's a single failure. And he's trying to figure out what went wrong, right? And so basically these people are in different teams, they're not talking to each other, but something is happening. And you could see that the root causes are not in the same place, so it's really hard to figure out what happened. But essentially, since it's a single failure, what I typically did as an engineer is I would bounce the host, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off again, hope that helps. And a lot of times that actually fixes problems, but sometimes it makes it worse. So in this particular scenario, all of a sudden there's an executive in a restaurant who has realized that prod has had a 5-minute outage and she's not happy about it. And so she pages everyone. And then the pain is universal, right? Like we've all been in this scenario. And so how do you get out of this place where outside of work hours, the pain is conveyed to nobody or maybe just to one person? And that's observability. And so what we're going to show you today is a demo of an open source approach to observability that anyone can use. And not just because we work at OCI, but because OCI is really convenient because of the free trial and always free tier and a pretty robust service offering around monitoring and observability. So we used OCI as our basis for our application. One thing to note is actually that OCI is incredibly open source friendly. So what we did is actually created a solution that of course works in OCI, but also can be extended using open source technology to either your entire IT portfolio or a highly specific use case, which is typically the two ways we see customers wanting to go. And so here's an idea for what you can do with open source technology to build an observability platform that works for you. So Sherwood, why don't we talk about the open source tech behind this? I think that's the funnest part.
Okay. Yeah. So as Erin said, OCI is very open source friendly. You know, if you will, in the earlier days of Oracle, you know, a lot of people thought Oracle was very proprietary, and in some situations that's very true. But that has since changed with the OCI platform. So now what we have is the ability to deploy and use open source on top of the OCI platform. With that in mind, some of the things that when we built this demo, we actually used tremendous number of open source products. We use, you know, Prometheus, we've used Jaeger's in here, FluentBit, OpenSearch here, even though OpenSearch itself is a open source library. I am using the OpenSearch managed service that is offered on OCI. And then we look at Kita and Grafana. Prometheus is metrics gathering. Jaeger does your tracing. FluentBit is what is scraping all the logs from my containers. OpenSearch is my backend for all my logs and my traces, and even Prometheus metrics. It can capture all of that. So I can actually build dashboards off of this information I'm capturing. Kita is, I think, one of the coolest products that come out in a long time, and that is for eventing. And so you can trigger events and take a course of action based upon different events that happen. And I will demonstrate how I use Prometheus, created my own custom metric for my application code. And then inside that, I use Kita to actually spin me up new replicas based upon the trigger event that I had specified. And then Grafana, a lot of us, I'm sure, know about, and that is for all your dashboards. Okay? So with that, and then everything that is running on Kubernetes, but it is running on the managed service Oracle Container Engines for Kubernetes on top of OCI. Okay? So I think now let's start in with a demo. And so as Erin is pointing out here on this slide, these are all the things that we're actually using. In the interest of time, we will not be covering Grafana. It's just we've got so much to cover as it is that we had to limit how much we can do in this amount of time. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll share my screen, okay? Erin, let's see.
Yep, go for it. You can take it over.
There is.
While we're waiting, has anyone used any of the technology that we listed on the slide? Would love to hear you weigh in the chat.
Yeah, and please, if you have any questions as we're going along, put them in chat, and we will do everything we can to answer them. And then Rolando has our contact information, so feel free to send us questions afterwards, and we'll more than happy to take the time to answer. All right, so let's start with the difference between monitoring and observability. One of the very first things, what you're looking at here is, and Felipe, yes, the response is yes. So if we look at what we have here, I'm just showing a Prometheus dashboard that's actually capturing metrics from my little application that's built. It's about 8 different services. There's 5 containers that I'm running that I'm using, but in the back end, I have RabbitMQ and Postgres and a mail server, and that's running in my back end. So let's take a look at, and this is one of the things that I just want to point out here. Many people do not understand that shipping with every Kubernetes instance or platform is a thing called cAdvisor. You'll hear it called cAdvisor. It's a container advisor. And that is compiled into the kubelet that is deployed on every one of your nodes. That thing is just a tremendous resource of information that you can get about each of the containers that's running on your node. And it's just filled with all kinds of data. So if you want to find out what's happening inside your container, that cAdvisor can give you a tremendous amount of information. But again, it's only monitoring information. It's not making any type of decisions on any of that. That's up to you, and that's where the observability comes in. So here, what I'm doing is say, hey, give me all the containers that are in this container CPU usage second total. And this is a value that comes out of the cAdvisor. And you just ask it, give me all that information. And it's going to deploy it right here to show it inside the Prometheus. Now, I can look at it in the graph form as well. And you can see all this, and you can hold over it, and then it's going to give you this information. And this is the RabbitMQ container that I was talking about, using the most amount of CPU that's deployed inside my application right now. This here is monitoring. It is giving you the state of where things are going at this point in time. Now let's take a sample let's take the difference between what is monitoring and what is observability. So let me show you real quick what I did with Prometheus. And one of the beautiful things that I did with Kita is this thing right here. And can you see it okay, Erin?
I can see your Prometheus browser tab.
What about my, you can't see my, darn. I've got my Visual Studio code showing. I wonder why it won't share all of that.
You might have to reshare. You might have to reshare using the tool. I feel like, yeah.
It says I'm sharing my entire screen.
Sorry.
All right. I hope I don't have to do that every time. Keep sharing the same thing. Let's see what it does on screen too.
Yeah, it's just loading right now for us.
All right. Well, the beauties of live demos. Anyhow.
Yes, maybe. I don't think the demo gods are smiling upon us today. Oh, there it goes. Okay, we're in Prometheus again.
Yeah, but I wanted to show what I have inside my studio code, Visual Studio, in a scaled object within Kita, is I'm able to set up a trigger that says, hey, I want you to look at Prometheus, and I want you to look at a specific metric, and then I have a threshold, and then I say, well, what do you want me to do? And so there's a query that says, hey, if you hit a certain percentage or certain rate, then I want you to scale up me another replica. And so when this runs, and because I can't share the whole thing, it's going to miss out on stuff, but when it runs, it actually will then spin up another version of my broker service. Okay, so I have it set that says, hey, if you get over a minute, if you get more than 3 requests over a minute, then I want you to spin me up another replica. However, I have it says, hey, watch that over a 2-minute window before you do that. So it doesn't do a lot of thrashing and starting and stopping the replicas. Now, so then the other thing is, so we have that. Now, as you do that, the other beautiful tool here, we use Prometheus, and I've used Kita to spin things up. Now I have the ability to actually trace my code. And I'm going to have to stop sharing, and so you can see the Jaeger dashboard. This is really a pain.
Well, it's funny because all the exciting stuff is happening in the chat anyway. Our new friend Marcelo is actually talking about his observability solution that he put together using Grafana and Prometheus, as well as Docker Swarm, which sounds really awesome to me. There's also one of the key things that you're learning is actually the integrations part, where you try to find the right tool for the job. And so I've never actually evaluated Loki for log analysis. We have some stuff in-house that we typically use, but integrating alarms on Slack channels and Microsoft Teams makes a great deal of sense. And
okay, so here is...
That's the beauty of open source.
Yeah, here's Jaeger. So I have all these traces that I put inside my code. And what it does then, it gives me the ability to actually see what's happening as my application is running. Now, keep in mind that you're running across, these distributed systems. And so you want to follow that request from front to back so you can understand where it's going, how much time each service is taking, and any other information. So one of the things that I have here, if I look on here, one of the things that is very interesting here is I put what you can call, they call them events. And I can actually add this data to my trace. So let's say I have a transaction ID and I want to follow that transaction ID all the way through, but I also want to find out what's in that transaction. I can add it as an event to my trace, and it will show up in my dashboard. So this gives you that ability to then follow it through, and then also along the lines, it's telling you how much time is being spent. I'm like, why is this thing taking so long? And it says, hey, why is this taking 2.2 seconds? When this thing started, it was 1.34 milliseconds. Where'd the other 2 seconds come from? So I come down here and I can look at the log request, and I see that this thing started at 2.26298 milliseconds, but it took 2 seconds to actually run. Now I know where to start looking for where that latency is. And I can look at this log request. Now, what I actually have in there is I have a random generator that says, I want you to sleep for X amount of time between 0 and 3 seconds. And so in this one, it says, oh, I slept for 2 seconds here. So I can actually now go in and drill in and find exactly where this problem is happening. Okay. So now you have the ability, you have Kita and Prometheus to take those observability metrics that you get from the monitoring to take an action so you don't miss those service level agreements. I now have the ability to track my request from start to finish and understand how much time is being spent at each location, as long as you put that in your code and set up that tracing, and I highly advise that you do that. Now, Jaeger itself, remember, is keeping everything inside an in-memory store, if you will. And so if that pod goes down, then I lose all my traces. Well, what you can do to prevent all that from happening, losing all your traces, is to have a back-end source. And that's what I have for OpenSearch. Now, OpenSearch, hey, shit, fantastic. So now OpenSearch gives me the ability to take all those Jaeger traces and spans and write it out into OpenSearch and store it. So now I can build patterns over time. So I can say, hey, this is a kernel mustard with the lead pipe that's causing this problem. Now I can take a course of action to stop kernel mustard with his lead pipe from causing my problems, right? And then I can look and build and says, well, hey, this doesn't look like kernel mustard, but let me see, is this Professor Plum is just a Professor Plum with the rope. And then I can build out all these metrics along the way and build out my dashboard. And now I can set in place activity or courses of action that will stop me from getting those phone calls in the night. And also the beauty about putting all these tools together is they work so nicely together. And if any of you remember the days of the core dump, when you get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning and they basically tell you there's a box of paper sitting on your desk when you get here to see if you can find the problem. Well, now you don't have to do that anymore. Now you can actually start diagnosing problems as they happen, or actually prevent them from happening. Okay, so the nice thing about this, if you look here, I say, hey, I can come to this dashboard and I want to look, and it says, hey, here's the trace ID. I can take that trace ID right here, and I can go back into my Jaeger UI dashboard. And as you see here, I can actually enter it, and it's going to give me the trace that was related to. And so now you have that connectivity between Jaeger, OpenSearch, or Elasticsearch, choose your flavor, or you can actually hook up to Cassandra. But the Elasticsearch and OpenSearch are actually better than Cassandra if you're in production. Okay, and then you also have this Prometheus, and what I did in Prometheus is I actually created my own request count, and that says, hey, I can see there's 33 requests, and now I see that it's now working. If you don't select your screen, but select an actual window, it works. And this is where this comes into play. Refresh now. Where I actually created a custom metric in my actual code. And now I could actually run and have that observability. So you have that whole monitoring, you take that monitoring information and you then turn that into observability, which then turns that into courses of action that you can take to prevent your system from dying, whatever that means, missing your service level agreements, systems going down, a whole host. We've all been there. There's many things that can happen. Keep in mind, you're dealing with distributed systems, and just by this being distributed, they add complexity, and that complexity at some point in time, plan on it, your system is going to fail somewhere. It could be a hardware, it could be software, new release with, those types of things, or you could start missing your service level agreements. To me, a service level agreement being missed is a broken system. And I'm sure your business will say the same thing. Therefore, we want to put things into place before they happen. And your business will come to love you as your system starts eliminating and alleviating all those problems with your system going down. Okay, so I think we'll stop that with the demo. So I'll turn it back over to you, Erin.
All right. Let's get back to this slide deck. All right, so just very quickly to recap, essentially we used OCI as our basis, built a containerized architecture using OKE, if you've ever used it. It's pretty, it's a flavor of Kubernetes. It works really well. And then what Sherwood did, and I don't want to take any credit for this part because this is very much his brainchild, was we looked through the open source ecosystem to find the tooling that we thought would best fit our use case. And so as you can see from the chat, everyone has a different use case, and some tools are better suited to them than others. And so a lot of the fun of this is playing around with all the tools that we have. It's no longer looking through, and this was in the era of the core dump, as Sherwood remembers, and as do I, where you get faxed 100 pages and you're just going through with a highlighter, right? This is so much better. So technology is changing and it's in all the right ways. It's bigger. And so we have to be more prepared. So a couple of things we wanted to give you as notes in case you're embarking on your own journey is to say, hey, start with the usual suspects, right? Like, you know your systems better than anyone. And a lot of times, you know this thing that's like a back of the mind thing where it gets slow on Wednesday evenings, probably for this reason. Well, anytime you think about your system having a personality, you should probably instrument, alarm, and track that, right? And so, like, keep in mind, you already know what needs to get done. And so just make a note every time you are training somebody or you're getting an engineer on your team up to speed. And then one thing that Sherwood and I tried to do, and maybe it didn't come through as much in the demo because we were showing so many tools, but we tried to think of a reactive solution so that when you first start out and you don't have a lot of instrumentation, what can you do? And so for latency, as you saw, Sherwood drilled into the Jaeger dashboard, and then he drilled down to very specific services. So if you're just getting started, already Jaeger and some of these tools can provide value. The other thing that we used is Docker search to view the different transactions, right? You can use that right out of the box. And so know that, like, even by making small efforts towards observability, you can get a high payoff. And so if you're thinking about, is it worth the effort? It probably is to get started. Secondly, what we wanted to do for latency, right, is once you have something in place, you're going to continuously refine it. That was that 4 boxes with the arrows that go back and forth. Like, now that you have something in place, how can you refine it? And so the amazing thing about a lot of these open source solutions is that you can actually set your SLAs in them. And Sherwood, maybe you want to talk about sort of how you can build a proactive solution for counteracting latency.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that I had talked about with the latency. You know, unfortunately, I couldn't see it because technology. And that is, you know, you can set up these triggers based upon rules that you would create, say, in your code, and you could count. You know, Prometheus has a beautiful set of APIs that you can then add to your code that can then request. You can then create your own custom metrics, and you can set up your metrics based upon your testing regarding how many requests can my service handle before I notice that it's going to start causing me delays. Well, one of the things you can do in that case then is set up a counter that says, hey, if I hit this in a certain amount of time, these number of requests, spin me up another replica. That's one way. The other thing is to set up to actually throttle the number of incoming requests. So these are the things that you can do, and you decide which is the best solution for your application. And so that's the beauty of this, is that you can customize it to your application and create those triggers that prevent you from having those issues. Those are the couple of things. I mean, particularly if you're using an Istio service mesh with that Envoy proxy, it's very easy to set up throttling, and it will throttle the number of requests coming into your service.
Yeah. And then another thing that we're starting to see, so trends, everyone experiences latency, right? Like when we talk about usual suspects, it's always there, but sometimes things are hiding beneath it, right? And a lot of times something that's hiding beneath it is out of memory. As we all know, companies have gotten more cost conscious, which limits the amount of fun that we can have with IT. But at the same time, it creates a really good problem for us in IT, where we can try to figure out how to optimize the size and the specs of our servers. However, when you're running slim like that and you're running very agile, sometimes you run out of memory. And so again, if this is a problem that feels relevant to you, it was pretty easy for Sherwood to implement the Prometheus alerts, that you can then obtain those alerts, and then once you receive them, drill down using Jaeger, OpenSearch, and the other tools that we explored today. And again, using the same tools ecosystem, create a proactive solution that's more durable.
I mentioned to everyone about the C advisor, the container advisor that is shipped inside the kubelet itself. It's all compiled as part of the kubelet. I actually had set up alerts to alert me if I started getting low memory on my different nodes. I also set up alerts for CPU utilization and also for my storage if I'm getting close to that capacity. In fact, I had a customer not too long ago that did that because they were consuming so much of the ephemeral storage inside that container that eventually it could not continue to run because all the ephemeral storage was consumed on that working node, and it started taking down the nodes. So what we did then, once we investigated and took a look into it, we noticed we could say, hey, look, you're taking 300 gig of ephemeral storage that doesn't leave much for anything else. And we were able to identify that just first taking a look and then looking in the Grafana dashboard, and we could go back in history and we could see the disk usage go up. Well, if they'd have put in a trigger when they started seeing that and an alarm, they would have been notified before that system, those nodes would have gone down. And it took their loyalty program down for a bit of time. And then we were able to get in and fix it. And now we have alerts set up so if that happens. And then they also put in a place a way to clean stuff up on a regular basis so this never happens again.
Yeah, there's all sorts of amazing things that we can do. It's like, and the thing that's so fun about observability is that in order to create a good observability solution, you need to know a great deal about the systems, which means that nobody is better equipped to do it than you are. Like monitoring, you can get some really amazing tools out of the box, but observability, you have to dig deep and you have to understand the business. You have to understand the code and the frameworks. And so that's why it's a little bit more complex, but I think it's a lot more rewarding and a lot more valuable at the end of the day. And so one thing that I think that we should just start with is just some of our learnings, right? As you go through this process, otherwise I'm sure you wouldn't be here, right? As you go through this process, you're going to learn all sorts of amazing things about the open source ecosystem. But what we found is just that the OCI service mesh and the open source or OpenSearch managed solution is quite powerful. And so that was good to validate for the products that we help to oversee. One thing that we were trying to think about is that if you're wondering where to start, right? We just threw a bunch of names at you and they're all funny sounding, right? But essentially, we think that if we were to distill it down to one, maybe start with Jaeger, that would be sort of the most manageable way to sort of start testing the ecosystem and getting benefit from it. And we really enjoyed the experience and found it really powerful. What would be your second place choice, Sherwood, in addition to Jaeger?
Prometheus.
Yeah, those custom metrics were just so powerful, super powerful.
And they're so easy to implement. So I would definitely look at, going from Jaeger and then starting into your Prometheus. And you can just put Prometheus without making any custom metrics just to get an idea of your system. And then you can start going in and creating your own custom metrics.
Yeah. And then what's really cool about those custom metrics is like the more specific you get, the more actionable it becomes, right? Because then you can wire it up to Kita should you be so inclined. I'm not trying to assign you homework. And what that does is it triggers all sorts of system events. And so if you need to spin up another pod, if you need to spin up another server, if you need to spin something down, like a lot of that can be taken care of behind the scenes. And so then it becomes a lot more predictable, which is actually key in monitoring. And then the final thing, which I think that everyone in this room can agree with, is that networking is hard, just really hard. And if anyone decides to solve networking in the next year or so, that would make me very happy. But you, like with anything with observability and monitoring, you can expect a failure or two along the way. But essentially, the learnings that we had as we extended and refined the solution, I really enjoyed this process. And Sherwood, thanks for inviting me along. Any last words, my friend?
Well, Erin and I talked, mainly about, dealing with the system as it's running and how to keep it up. But, there's, like I said, there's going to be problems. So, so one of the next things we wanted to talk about, at a future date, Rolando, invite us back on that 10 country tour there, is failure across multiple systems. And then the other thing is, if you're so inclined and you're able to go cloud world, I'll be doing a hands-on lab for high availability and disaster recovery in your Kubernetes environment.
Yes, and mucho gusto. Fue un placer platicar con ustedes. Y espero que no sea la última vez.
Gracias, Erin, Sherwood. Thank you, Sherwood, Erin. I don't see another question. I see some comments during the session that I think Erin already mentioned about Marcelo, who is already working with some of the open source technologies, and also he mentioned about the start usage of Loki for logs consolidation and analysis. But other than that, I don't see another question. Just David Sutherland just mentioned that it was a good session. Muchas gracias. And also Ricardo Ortega, who is a good friend of mine, he said great talk. And I think that's it. But yes, definitely, as Sherwood mentioned, probably next year we will have the in-person tour, and hopefully that can happen, and you can join us as well. Erin, you are invited. And,
thanks.
and also, just for your information, we'll start a set of webinars here with the Oracle local office in Mexico. And actually, there is an agenda that I already shared with them. And one of the topics is about observability. So I will contact you, either Erin or Sherwood. And if you want to join us, that would be great as well.
Sure. So, and just as a comment about Loki and FluentBit work extremely well together. So if you want to take a look at that, that'd be something to investigate.
Yeah, and FluentBit is just the compressed version of FluentD, in case anyone's wondering about all the Fluent words. But yeah, man, this is exciting. Can't wait to talk to you all again. Thanks for the opportunity, Rolando.
Oh, thank you. And sorry about all the issues of your screen sharing.
I think if there's a murder mystery about live meeting being murdered, you'll know it's me and Sherwood. You won't need to set any traces.
All right, that sounds good. Okay, so thank you. We really appreciate it, and see you the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolando.
Thanks.
Bye.